Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
and I'm Stephen Park. And today we bring you our first read of Valley Verified by Kyla Zhao. We're introduced into this world of Valley Verified through the eyes of Zoe Zeng, who is attending a press conference for this clothing brand that is supposed to be very sustainable. It's supposed to be new and chic and very cool.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we end up seeing the founder of this brand talk about the way that he creates clothing is he doesn't want to create clothing for certain sizes because the material is expensive and he doesn't want to create waste. And so sustainability is the thing that he's looking for. So, like, all that kind of BS. But what it got me to think about is a real life clothing brand that had a very similar story. So, I don't know how many people know the story. I think you know the story because I've mentioned this to you.
I've known it ahead of you mentioning it to me.
Right, and it's a very popular brand. It's one that I have in my closet, and I've known this, but I've mainly bought the stuff after they started changing and navigating to a different direction. But that clothing brand is Lululemon.
Mm-hmm.
Now, just from the inception of Lululemon, the founder and the former CEO, Chip Wilson, created the brand with a very purposeful intent to the name Lululemon. He wanted to put three L's in there because it creates a sound that's not present in Japanese phonetics, or I don't think in Korean phonetics either. And in his own words, it's funny to watch them try and say it. So just from that alone, it's a pretty disgusting statement. And to create an entire brand because you think it's funny that someone can't pronounce it is just ridiculous.
It's terrible.
Yeah. From there, he goes on to be that same kind of terrible human. So in 2005, Chip Wilson does an interview with the Calgary Herald and talks about plus size clothing being a money loser, claiming that because it takes more fabric to make larger sizes, it's not a viable option. Which, firstly, your pants cost like $100 to $150. We're not buying that clothing just for the fabric. Like there's much more that goes into making a company and a brand,
Right.
which I would figure you would know being in that industry.
I mean, CEOs don't really work, so I'm pretty sure he doesn't know what's going on.
Fair. In 2013, he also ends up blaming a yoga pants recall on the thigh size of customers, saying that it's the customers' thighs that had ripped the fabric, and then he blamed the company's diversity and inclusion efforts as a reasoning for why the brand is not doing well. It seemed to ring very similarly with what we read at the beginning of this story.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that I think Lululemon has gone away from. From what I see from their marketing campaigns, from personal aspects of knowing people that are ambassadors for the company, I now see people that are of Asian descent. I see people that are larger bodied. I see much more campaigning to get a normalized view of clothing and attire rather than one that's supposed to fit a very specific body type or is trying to create a brand around a Unitarian image.
Plus, I think the CEO has been replaced, right?
Yeah, he was replaced, I think, in like 2000 and something, but
Mm,
he's been replaced for a while because of the crap that he said.
for sure. A lot of terrible things from a terrible human.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where it's like you can easily choose to use that as a platform to not ever want to buy from this company. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
inception of the company was terrible. I tend to kind of move along with whatever the company does. I think it's kind of like the way that I see people is like you can make a mistake, but if you learn from that mistake and then you can grow from it, then I'm more than willing to accept the growth rather than the initial onset.
That's fair.
But yeah, also fun fact, I was traveling with my brother once. This is when Lululemon was kind of just starting up, and him and his at that point fiance, now wife, adamantly stood ground and told me that the store that we were looking at, which was Lululemon,
Mm-hmm.
was pronounced Lululemon. And I was like, no, I promise you, I've heard the store pronounced Lululemon. But they were so adamant, and there was no accents above the name. Like, I was like, interesting. So, yeah, whether you want to shop Lululemon, Lululemon, completely your choice.
For sure.
It seems like we're not dealing as much with clothing branding and stuff as we go further into the read. But before we discuss that read any further, let's go ahead and look at our recommendation for the week.
Our recommendation for the week is Elisa Wong. Elisa Wong is a Chinese Mexican designer and visual artist currently based in Los Angeles, California. She's on a mission to build a more liberated future. Her style, which features a warm palette, is inspired by nature, surrealism, mindfulness, and her multicultural heritage. Elisa is also the co founder of Little Winds Studio, making brands, stories, objects, and resources that drive societies forward. You can learn more about Elisa's work through her website at elisawong.com. That's ELISAWONG.com. And you can find her on Instagram at Elisa Does Stuff.
Yep, and that's going to be our recommendation for the week. Okay, so back to our first read of Valley Verified by Kyla Zhao. In this first read, we've read pages 1 through 93, which included chapters 1 through chapter 12. Luckily, with this book being a lighter read, we don't have any content warnings. So we're kind of in it for what I was hoping that we'd be reading.
I think the only content warning, if any, is possibly fat shaming
Mm, like in the beginning of the
at the
story?
very beginning, yes.
That's fair.
So
Absolutely.
so keep that in mind when entering this book.
Yeah, and I would say for the most part, our main character, Zoe Zeng, is defending that. It's the overall corporate kind of aspect and view of fat shaming.
Definitely. So defending as in she's trying to be more inclusive of all sizes.
Right, like that shouldn't be a thing.
Right.
So let's go ahead and get into the story. So Zoe Zhang is this person that I've mentioned a couple times now, but she's our main character. I would assume she's our protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
She's the one that's going to be going through the struggles of trying to make her way and navigate the complexities of a new work life, a new career, and a completely new city all at the same time.
Exactly. But when we are introduced to her, she's stuck in this unforgiving and unappreciative fashion journalist job in New York City.
Right. She seemingly is going through the paces of being a lower piece in the totem pole.
Yeah,
She is having to go to all these events that are late at night. She's having to do the work that most people don't want to do, the setups at 4 a.m., the late night parties until 3 a.m., and then all of that being back to back. And it's within the vibrant space of New York, which is a city that, depending on what your profession is, a lot of times doesn't manage a work life balance.
definitely. And on top of the late hours and early hours, her editor in chief doesn't really appreciate her creativity and kind of tells her what to write instead of letting her have that freedom.
Right. She ends up just being a copyright, a person that's putting
Mhm.
stuff out there and doing it because that's what she's being told to put out there.
Exactly. And her life in New York City is very unglamorous. Like, she talks about living in a very small apartment with three other roommates and having to put her clothes in the oven.
Yeah. If you've known anyone that's kind of lived in New York City and they haven't had a glamorous job, this is seemingly a possibility. It's not everybody, but with the cost of rent, with the cost of housing, I'm assuming you'd also see this in places like San Francisco. If you want to create a living that a place like New York City might allow, whether it's acting, whether it's something in fashion, whether it's, New York City is a mecca for culture and what that revolves around. But
Mm-hmm.
then to enter that, it's a hard world to break into. So
Absolutely.
usually you don't have a ton of finances to allow yourself to go to that.
For sure. And especially because it's such a highly packed environment as well in terms of population.
Right. And all of this kind of ends up falling into the equation for what happens next, which is Zoe attending a press party. She ends up meeting a person named Bill who works for a new startup called FitPick. This is a startup that deals around fashion and creating a resource for people to get opinions on what they're wearing so that, it's kind of like a social media app contained within a world of fashion.
Exactly. Essentially, what people are doing is posting pictures of themselves in different outfits and having people share their opinions. It's like asking your friend, "How do I look?"
Right. She is given this incredible offer of a VP marketing position right on the spot. And it's one that Zoe has to sit back and think about for a little bit, but she fairly quickly decides that she's probably going to take this job.
Right, which I think was very interesting. I'm pretty sure that the character themselves probably thought about what would go wrong or what would go right in this new job, but in the actual book, there are no pros and cons lists.
Right, right. I do feel like Zoe was in a position where she was probably frustrated, she was probably tired, fatigued, burned out, and it made the decision come fairly quickly because of
Mm.
those factors.
Mm-hmm.
We also know that at that time, Chic was in a space where people didn't know the future of the company.
Right.
She thought that Chic was going to close down. She thought that the world that she knew was going to come crashing down anyway. So it seemed like this was the next moving on point that would elevate her and get her into a better position and standing so that she can create a future for herself.
Fair. She had that thought that she can have a more stable job in a place where she can get more money.
Right. And the other part of it is that, like we just discussed, her creativity was being stifled. She wasn't able to feel like she was moving in the direction that she wanted to with her career.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this new VP marketing position seems so enticing from the aspect of creating change with fashion in a completely new space.
Totally. And at a higher level too, as a vice president.
Right.
However, I also think that by leaving, she's leaving behind a good work environment, as in not necessarily her editor in chief, but her friends Bjorn and Cassie.
Right. I mean, I think there's a lot that eventually goes into the equation here.
Mm-hmm.
Not only is she leaving her friends, she's also leaving the city that seems to fit along with who she is. She seems to have a fun time when she is in New York. San Francisco is a completely different place. The vibe and the amount of things that you can do in San Francisco versus New York is vastly different. The type of things that you can do in both cities are also majorly differing. So I do think that this is a big decision for her to make, and probably one that she makes more rashly than maybe she should have.
Right, exactly.
But it also comes with the fact that she is in her 20s, I think. Like, I don't know if we actually get an age of where she is,
Mm-hmm.
but she seemingly seems like someone who's like mid 20s, like someone young in their career. So
Right.
their lives are much more mobile and able to be adjusted rather than someone who is settled and has a family or has a house or has roots down for some reason in a particular city.
True. She does mention that Chic is her very first job out of college, so who knows where she would have gone if she stayed at Chic. But yeah, going from fashion journalist at the bottom of the ladder all the way to a VP at the top of the ladder is totally a big jump in career.
Right. So she decides to go with FitPick ultimately. Once again, one of the factors was that Chic was on its way down. But what we learn later in the read is that Chic ends up being invested in. And one of the reasons is because of Zoe's past article. And it brings a certain amount of sadness to Zoe and a heartbreak knowing that this does happen because, once again, the company going down was one of the reasons that pushed her towards San Francisco.
Exactly. It does give her also FOMO knowing that she's the one who caused the company to rise from the ashes and fly into the air
Right,
like a phoenix.
right. So now we follow Zoe into this whole new world and space of Silicon Valley. She is taking up this position that is called the VP marketing position, which, when we follow her life, which we soon learn that it's a position that was more created than a position that she has stepped into. It's also something that had been created for the purpose of the look of the company more than the reasoning of trying to improve the company.
Mm-hmm.
But Zoe's trying to take up this space where she's going to make this position as valuable as possible. However, she does run into the obstacle of having to fight off coworkers that aren't necessarily keen to fashion. They're much more keen to their keyboards.
Right. They're very much focused, and I think which is their downfall from the beginning. They're so focused on the tech and how it's working or not working rather than how it's being perceived by their audience.
Right. So it seems like this position was actually very necessary because the closest they have to someone who's maybe looking at fashion in certain ways is their COO, Lillian. And even she doesn't really care that much. Like she talks about her own attire, which initially Zoe sees as like this cool fashion vibe of turtleneck sweaters. And like she really likes the way that Lillian looks. But then Lillian describes it as a way of not having to worry how to dress.
Mm-hmm.
So we have an entire company of people that are all wearing the same Patagonia jackets, which is very much a real life Silicon Valley thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's also very much a PNW Pacific Northwest thing
Yes.
where everyone dresses very much the same. Like you walk down the street and everyone has the same puffy jacket, everyone has the same type of pants. In the summer, it's Birkenstocks. In the winter, it's some form of boots.
Uggs.
The Uggs, that's more like a California thing. You need the fur for warm days. You need to stay extra warm on the feet for warm days. So Southern California, I think, they take up the Uggs. But
Mm.
yeah, it's a vibe that doesn't really look at what fashion is. And so this company is filled with people who also are not looking at what fashion is. So it seems like Zoe's presence here is maybe not welcomed, but absolutely warranted.
Right, very necessary. But besides Lillian, she does butt heads with another couple of coworkers, Bram and Austin. Although Austin is kind to her face, when she is in the co-ed bathroom, she overhears them laughing and talking about her behind her back.
Right. And this then shows the stark contrast between what she has in Silicon Valley and what she had in New York, because the friends that she had in New York, Bjorn and Cassie, are her lifetime friends. They're the people that she still is not leaving, even though she has flown across the country. They're
Mm-hmm.
people that helped her with her wardrobe and her dressing at like 4 a.m., which is like 7 a.m. New York time,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still an early time where Bjorn and Cassie have to sneak off into the restroom to jump on a call just so that they can help Zoe with her outfit of the day.
Right.
These are friends. These are the people that no matter what trouble you get into, no matter what situations you need help with, they're the ones that are going to be sticking next to you.
Mm-hmm.
And yet she has to leave all of that for now Austin and Bram,
Mm-hmm.
who are just interesting people up till this point.
Uh-huh.
One thing that we can find a little bit solace in is this new character that enters the equation, and that's Damien.
Mm-hmm. Who comes in as a very stoic character. He doesn't say much, he doesn't offer a lot of emotion, and he kind of doesn't have much to do or say to Zoe when they first meet.
Right. And Damien kind of gives me this vibe. And I think the way that we're always going to talk about this thought and this word that I'm going to use next is always in a much more positive light because I think the way that society tends to use it is negatively.
Hmm.
But Damien seems a little neurodivergent, a little bit
Oh.
neurospicy
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because the way that he kind of reacts and the way that he talks to Zoe is very stoic,
Yes, yes.
but it's kind of aloof. And I see that a lot in terms of people that have social anxieties, and some of that can definitely come from different things like ADHD or from being on the spectrum of autism. So Damien kind of gives me a little bit of those vibes, even though from a sense of what we see from Zoe's eyes, he is this hot, hunky dude that's entering the world of Zoe.
For real. We do get a little sense of Damien and his inner world though when he's training Zoe at one point. When Zoe prompts him about whether or not he feels like he should be in the tech space and then dials it back, Damien does end up opening up and saying he's really good at what he does, but he doesn't know if it's what he wants.
Right. And this is that connection that's starting to form. It's where we start to see Zoe. I think it says something very specifically in the book, but we see her start to maybe trip and kind of start to move in the pattern of falling in love.
Mm.
So we'll see where this goes because I definitely feel like this is the love interest in the book. This is the ooey gooey that's going to happen.
Hmm.
Do you also see that happening?
I think it's a possibility, but I think the subject matter of the book makes me think that there might not be space for love, but who knows?
Right. This book is kind of what I was hoping that we'd get after our heavier reads.
Mhm.
It's light, it's fluffy, it gives off a little bit of romantic novel kind of story without it being romantic novel. Like it's still dealing with some very serious topics like the clothing industry and what that represents with a woman in a position of higher power,
Yeah.
also a woman in tech. Like it does revolve around very heavy topics if we look at it from that sense and that point of view.
Hmm.
But from the eyes of Zoe so far, at least what I'm seeing is a read that's very light. We can get through the initial 12 chapters very easily with
Yes.
just being able to listen to the story of the things that she's going through and a very familiar struggle with I think with a lot of people have nowadays with transitioning from different work sites or moving away from home or
Hmm.
all those complexities that we have to deal with.
Absolutely. My first impression of the book is that it's very quick to read through. After getting used to the pacing of the book, I think that yes, we were able to zoom past those 12 chapters, especially because the chapters are pretty short.
Right, right. So that is going to bring us to the second read of our book, and that is going to be,
Pages 94 through 181, and that will be chapters 13 through 21.
yep. And for anyone that's also reading along with us, if you have any thoughts, if you want to release some energy against Lululemon just because you need to send it out somewhere, you can definitely send it to our email. And how can people reach us?
You can reach us through email at asianbookclubpod@gmail.com or through Instagram at asianbookclubpod.
We also have our website, which is asianbookclubpod.com, which has our bookshop with books that we've read in the past, books that we recommend, and books that we plan to read in the future.
And a great way to support us is to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast.
Otherwise, make sure to be happy, be healthy, and read a book.
Ingat!
Bye.
Bye!